Okay, hello everybody. This is Surayya from Purposeful Professional Media, and we are back with the podcast for the people, your careers, and the culture. Today, I'm very excited to have a newly minted entrepreneur with me, but also somebody that I knew from undergrad way back. I'm very, very excited to have Dr. Arianna Beetz here to talk about her journey. She has such a diverse journey, so many different, we could say, areas of study, but also interests that have led to this one very purposeful path. So I'm always excited to introduce you all to people who are doing the work to live a purposeful path. Yeah, thank you. Introduce yourself to the people on the podcast, Ariana. Thank you.
Yeah, hey everybody. My name is Arianna Beetz. I am an entrepreneur now, but former academic. Extremely passionate about all things well being, and I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm always excited when I can like have people that I feel like I knew in a past life on the podcast. Very, very excited because it's always full circle for me. So, Ariana, one thing we like to do with our guests is we like to ask them about a pop culture, we could say topic or craze that's related to their area of expertise. And one thing that I thought about is I thought about the green powders that are all over the place. And because you are an expert in wellness, especially I thought about, what's going on with the green powders. I have another podcast where we discuss Ozempic. So I figured I was like, okay, if it's not Ozempic, because I think about that maybe like every day, every other day. I think about Ozempic and like what that's doing to our society in terms of weight. But if it's not Ozempic, I'm thinking about these like mystery green powders. Like what's in the bloom powder? What's in athletic greens? Like what's in these stuff? Should I take it? I growing up, I struggled with anemia, especially. So I was like, man, should I take it? Should I not take it? So I want to talk to you about these green powders and like whether or not they're actually good for us. So we do reference an article that we're going to share with the audience, and it's from Eater. So of course, it's like a foodie magazine type article, and it talks about the green powders and the perception that people have versus what it actually does to the body. So we're gonna get into that. And my first question for you is like why do you think people are crazed over the green powders? Why do you think this craze has caught on?
Sure. Well, I think Americans love convenience. So we live in such a busy lifestyle where most people just don't have the time to get every single nutrient that they would want to get. And then, secondly, we also are so inundated with nutrition. Different research comes out daily, things change. And as we know, as true scientist knows that science always changes, right? So as a consumer, it's so hard to understand what we need today and so hard to be able to get the 1000 nutritional recommendations daily. So the idea of just being able to pour something in a cup and put a little water and then, check off our daily nutrition is so enticing.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's way too enticing. And sometimes I'm like, man, I wish I knew about athletic greens or Bloom in college because yikes, like my nutrition was really, really bad in college. And as I graduated, I realized how like malnourished I was in certain areas, like the college diet of, just going out to eat. I wasn't getting enough vitamins. I wasn't, as healthy as I could be. So, yes, it's very enticing to go out and say, I can shake this thing in a bottle and I can automatically feel like, oh, I'm healthier. And then I'm sure you understand the placebo effect. Like even if these things don't make us healthier per se, we still do feel a difference in our body after taking that vitamin, after taking that superfood product, etc. But I also want to ask you, like, what are the alternatives that you think exist for health and wellness, like beyond like these traditional like powdered supplements?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that the powdered supplements are a great alternative if you're on the go. And in fact, Nourish, my brand, well, it's not a supplement per se, it's a real food powder on the go, really tries to solve that space of being convenient and then deeply healthy and nourishing. So this isn't important. It's just a reality of the fact is that we're super busy and there will just need times that we need to grab these things on the go. But if you have the time, it's always great to get your food from a real food source. So for example, if you are on the go, just grabbing whatever sorts of fruits and veggies you can take on the go is such an easy alternative. Grab, a few apples, berries, bananas, all of those things that you can pack, grabbing your healthy fats to go with that, nuts, etc., and some sort of protein as well. And again, what Nourish is trying to do is really being the protein source as well. So having a clean source of protein on the go, because I think that's harder to find of the three. But I always tell people really focus on the trifecta of high micronutrient carbs that are unprocessed, such as fruits, then healthy fats, such as, nuts are so easy to take on the go. And then having that protein source to make sure to strengthen your muscles and to keep your blood sugar balanced. And I don't think it's as hard as people really say that it might be. So just have to think a little outside the box.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think like even when if I think of like the rise of the bento box, like a lot of people are like bento
Exactly.
box packing lunches. Especially there's this like weird, I don't even want to say TikTok fad, but there's this like TikTok community of women that pack bento box lunches for their husbands. And I'll see them put like a fruit, some nuts, da da da. So I was like, oh, like a bento box is like a very simple way to remember, okay,
Yeah.
have a little protein, get some peanut butter, get some vegetables, get some fruit, et cetera, et cetera. But I also do think it's hard for many of us that grew up, I guess we could say on the run. Like I went to high
Yes.
school in New York City, and like after school, people would get like chopped cheeses, and
Yeah.
there was a million and one bad choices of like what to eat in the urban environment. So
Yes.
I think like now I love the fact that we're more mindful eaters, but I
Mhm.
honestly think like being a child of the early 2000s, that is a long way. Like even our TV dinners had a brownie and some fake mac and cheese. Like we've come a long way in terms
Yeah.
of understanding nutrition. And I still feel like many of us have a long way to go.
Absolutely. Statistically speaking, there's just so much food deserts out there, and it's really hard. And again, that's really why I've created Nourish, and it's because unfortunately, as much as we would all like to have fresh fruits and slow roasted meals, etc., that's just not the reality for people. So we have to find convenient alternatives as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Quick pop culture segment in question. So I want to get into your story, and we tend to divide this episode into three parts: people, career, culture. I think you have one of the most interesting, I would say, story arcs I've heard in a long time. Being that I do see people going from going to be on an academic path to being an entrepreneur, but usually they go into academia and then quit. I don't know if you see that, but it seems like fate directed you faster out of the path that maybe wouldn't have given you more fulfillment. So I think that's interesting because usually when I talk to people, they're like, oh, I was a professor at, and then I quit. I'm like, oh wow, okay. So you have a really interesting arc, and I want to get into your story. So my first question for you is like, I feel like your life is divided into two parts. There was one half where you were interested in psychology, and then the other half you were kind of like nursing this interest in nutrition. First and foremost, like how did you develop an interest in psychology? When did that first come up for you?
Yeah, sure. So I've always been really passionate about holistic health in general. And I think my interest in psychology really developed when I was young. I loved reading. So I was always reading every book I could get my hands on. I was a total nerd and did all the reading competitions I remember in my elementary school when I moved to the US. So part of that, I started reading books on psychology. And I'm an immigrant. My mom raised me as a single mom. We moved here when I was 7, and I saw a lot of her struggles as she raised me. She struggled with depression and loneliness, anxiety, and
Mm.
I had so much compassion for her because she was just on her own raising me, and that really got me to really think through the impact of psychology, whether positive or whether if you're struggling on your overall health, and that became a big interest of mine. And it was just really clear to see the impact of psychology on your health because we always ate really healthy. We prioritize that just seeing how mental health impacts your overall health and well-being. I always had an interest in that, and it was always something I'm deeply passionate about.
Yeah, I think wow, because I feel like psychology is such a dynamic field,
Mhm.
but I often think that people who get involved in the field of psychology, specifically those who study it at the undergrad level, are those who really understand its value and can see its
Mhm.
value. I
Mhm.
think it took me a long time to understand the value of psychology. I had to, go out into the real world, grow up a little bit, and figure out, oh, like this is why I need to understand people. But I always hear a formative experience that makes you understand, wow, like understanding the inner world is
Mhm.
so powerful and so effective. So I definitely love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
So I also want to know on the flip side, like, how did you develop an interest in nutrition? Because people would say, okay, usually people that are interested in the mind, we're really just starting to get to mind body integration. I honestly feel like mind body soul has become a thing in maybe the last 10 years. So usually people who are interested in the mind are not as interested in the body. So I want to know, like, how did you, on top of having the interest in psychology, develop that concurrent interest in nutrition?
Sure. Well, again, I think holistic medicine, both the psychology and nutritional aspects are absolute key. There's more and more emerging research, for example, on the gut brain axis, on how your mind and body and gut health are interconnected. Um, but in terms of very specifically how I got into nutrition, when I moved to the U.S., my mom really prioritized nutrition always. So again, we were not a financially of means. My mom actually raised me as a nanny, but so money
Mm.
was tight, but no matter what, every single night there was a home cooked meal. And no matter what, she always made me super healthy breakfast. And that's very common, actually. Street food in Cusco and Lima is a porridge made out of quinoa. You put a little maca, you put a little chia in it, and she always fed that for me for every breakfast. And she, to this day, makes a joke that the reason that I was like smart and that quote unquote and able to go to be the first one in my family to go to college, etc., is because of the effort that she put into my nutrition, and that always that kernel always stood by me, and I developed a passion for nutrition as well.
Yeah, I feel there's something so I feel like nourishing. It's funny how your business is called Nourish because I think
Yes.
nourish is like such a great word. But there's something so nourishing about a parent's love. And even in the midst of, we could say, harder circumstances, being able to understand, hey, like you need vegetables,
Right.
fruits. And I think it's funny that you talked about Peru because the woman that took care of me and my siblings, she was our babysitter.
Mhm.
She was from Peru. And
Mm.
she exposed us to a lot of like, I grew up like one of my favorite flavors of ice cream is lucuma. That's one of my favorite
Oh,
ice cream
wow.
flavors.
That's a
You
flavor of
know, so
nourish.
she was our caretaker from maybe like 10 years, like very, very
Mhm.
formative. So she also had that mindset. And then my family's Caribbean. So we understand like what
Yeah.
it's like to, have the fruits and the vegetables. And granted, we don't come from a lot either, but there
Right.
was this emphasis on, no matter what you come from, having that resource, being able to know, what plants can heal this, or
Mhm.
what herb is good for this. Like I think there's this ancestral wisdom almost wrapped in the fruits, especially when you come from an immigrant background. So
Mhm.
thank you for sharing that. Do you think that your mother had a natural affinity for knowing like which herbs and which plants were good for what, or which fruits were good for what, or was it something that she learned over time?
I think that's actually just how she was raised. So my mom is from a little town in Peru in the Andes Mountains called Uchumarca, and she was raised basically in the middle of nowhere. And she always is telling me stories about my grandma, who unfortunately passed away before I was born. Knew like a random thing for everything. So there are just so many random little remedies. There's this herb called paiko that my mom used to make a soup for me whenever I had a stomachache, for example. And I remember walking one day in Tampa when I was like 10 or something. We were going for a walk, and she found it on the streets. She just like literally recognized it, grabbed some, and made a soup that day, and was like, "Oh, I haven't seen this around in the U.S." So definitely. It's been really funny, but we definitely have all these random little herbal remedies. And what's really cool is then when I started studying nutrition now, and I really keep in tune for new nutritional developments and thinking through, what functional foods can I put in Nourish. I start to see research about all these foods. So lucuma, you mentioned, is actually one
Mhm.
of the flavors of Nourish, and it's been really exciting to start thinking through the educational aspects of how to expose the American market to all of its benefits. But one of its benefits, it's a prebiotic fruit, so it really helps
Mhm.
your gut health. And that's happened to me thousands of times where I there's like here's something from my childhood. My mom tells me it's going to do this, like, blah, blah, blah to me. And then, a few years later, there's going to be studies showing that exact same folk wisdom turned into hard science, which is really cool.
Yeah, I swear, like, I mean, there's a tea for everything, there's a herb for everything, and I love the fact that even nowadays we have people that are herbalists because, like, it's a career to tell
Right.
people, "Hey, like, when you're feeling a certain way, you don't have to go to get that medicine right away. Here's a herb that you can use." Even, like, different topical treatments as well from
Yeah.
aloe, and I mean,
Mm,
we're going there today in our society, and it's something that you could just geek out over. Like, some of my
I
favorite
do all
YouTubers
the time.
some
I
of my
have
favorite
so many
YouTubers.
notes on that.
Yeah, some of my favorite YouTubers are like, we could say like holistic health
Mhm.
specialists, et cetera, et cetera. And I really do like that it's becoming a movement. Like we're realizing you don't have to turn to medication for
Right.
everything. You don't have to turn to the surgeon or the doctor for everything. Granted, there are times where you need to be given a checkup, but there are
Of
also times when
course.
you go and you consult traditional medicine and they give you more meds to make the situation worse.
Right.
So I think that like I love the fact that the collective wisdom is changing to understand, yes, like we actually have plants that can heal. We have
Right.
fruits that can heal. And it's funny you talked about lucuma because I was just saying like that's one of my favorite flavors ever.
Yeah, that's
And
awesome.
listen, that's like my favorite ice cream. I joke that my two
Same.
favorite ice cream flavors are lucuma and then horchata.
Mm, heck yeah.
Because I grew up in New York, very proximate to the Latino community. So I always joke that those are my two like favorite flavors. But yeah, those are my two favorite ice cream
That's
flavors for real.
amazing. Yeah.
Um, but I think that I love the fact that I'm hearing a lot about like lucuma and also like for the Filipino culture, ube, like we're hearing about
Love
new types of
movie.
fruits and new types of flavors. And I think it's a great time for you to be in we can say the sector that you're in because people are waking up to the fact that, hey, there are fruits and, starches, etc., proteins outside of what I was raised with that are pretty, pretty
Mhm.
cool. So speaking of Nourish, over time, right, these past few to create the path that you are on today as the founder of Nourish and an entrepreneur, we could say wellness leader and also innovator in the space. So how do these foundational interests and experiences in psychology inform your approach to nutrition and vice versa?
Yeah, so I think one really interesting thing is, again, just going back to the whole approach to holistic health. And what that really means is that as much as I am knee deep in the nutritional research on a biochemical level, and I love geeking out about that, it's also really important for me to take a step back and see food as a connector. So, and what
Mm,
I mean by that is that, okay, you can say, for example, I, I'm thinking we have this food in Peru called jalea. It's a deep fried fish, like a bunch of deep fried fish. Uh, so many bad things related to deep frying, right? Like I can go on. Yeah, I don't even need to go in the deep aspects of that. But that also means if I'm enjoying that with my family that I haven't seen in a year and we're, laughing and telling old jokes and, maybe even drinking a pisco sour with that, those memories and the psychology behind that is so amazing that I can't just deconstruct a nutrient to specifically what it does. And I think that's where the approach of psychology really comes in, that you can't just call a food by its nutrients, but also what it means in a sociocultural aspect.
yeah, yeah, it's crazy because I was in an accelerator and there was a woman who went to that same accelerator and she started a dietary service that was
Mhm.
culturally sound.
Mhm.
And she talked about like especially for immigrant cultures, like coming to the US and like learning, oh well, we consider this food to be unhealthy. It's another source of shaming. It's another
Right,
source of trying to disconnect people from the things that
right.
make them feel like they are who they are, which like you said, is food. So you're not the person that like is gonna go to Thanksgiving and say, how much calories are this? How much calories is this? Is this vegan? Is this
Right,
you're not
yeah.
that person. Are you that person or no?
No, and I actually, I did go through. I was plant based for 2 years, but ultimately,
Okay.
again, my reflection on psychology and just deep reflecting, I thought I've now switched where I'm like plant based at home, but outside when people bring me into their homes and they show me their love and cook for me and show me all these beautiful cultural aspects, and I just eat everything, and I just cherish those memories. To me, food is love, so that's also I think where the psychology of food comes in as well.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's because usually when people are very into wellness, there is a certain, I guess we could say, expectation to automatically become a vegan. Like rebrand as vegan now and start posting those vegan meals on TikTok and Instagram and, build that brand as that. And, it gets to a point where we're looking to Thanksgiving in a couple of weeks. You're thinking like, what are the dietary restrictions? Who's vegan? Who's vegetarian? Who's
Right.
pescatarian? And how do I balance it all? And oh my God, like when you're hosting and when you're cooking, you got to think about everybody. You better have that eggplant parmesan for the vegans. You better have, the
Yeah.
pescatarian fish. So I find it very interesting, but also I think also very authentic that you didn't feel the need to like automatically become a vegan and like use that
Yeah.
to, sell yourself as an entrepreneur and build your brand.
Yeah, no, again, I am plant-based at home, but outside there one, again,
Okay.
just the psychology aspect, but then 2, there are just too many things I love, and will not and to me, again, life is short. There are many meet plant-based people, vegan people that don't like the taste of meats, for example, and it's
Mhm.
very easy for them. I do. So if I, again, if I'm hosted by somebody as a special treat out, I will do it because I enjoy the taste, I enjoy the experience, and then personally at home, it's easy for me to remain plant-based, so yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's very different because I'm so used to like if I am the one cooking or helping
Yeah,
with the cooking, calling and asking who's
right.
vegetarian, who's pescatarian, who like let me figure it out from now so that we make sure that everyone has a dish.
It's very
You're right,
good.
like it is culture, there is some flexibility involved, and I really also do like that. I think that's a very good mindset to have, like not to be no offense to my plant-based, brothers and sisters, because I love them and I love plant-based food as well. And there's also some stuff in my past where there were times where I would go to schools where they only served
Mhm.
plant-based. So I understand what it's like to eat, vegetarian, vegan food, etc. But I think that there needs to be some flexibility or also some grace for the people that are hosting. Because
Right.
dang,
Yeah,
it's
that's what
definitely
I think.
tough. Hmm. And some
Agree.
of it, like some of these stuff, as much as they're better. Like, oh my god, they're more expensive, and sometimes it also can be a cost barrier to really being able to
Yeah.
provide people with the level of like vegan meals that you want to. So I think that's also something that I think about. But I want to think a little bit about, or go a little bit back to talking about your childhood as well. I think that someone who studies psychology, you talk a lot about family, you're talking a lot about like very formative things. I would love to hear more about like, I'm really just obsessed with the area of psychology that talks about like childhood and like looking into our
Yeah.
childhood and like what did we learn from that. So here's a question. I'm sure you've been inundated with theories about like childhood development and like how it sets the stage for later in life achievements and traits. For you, I think that seems to ring true because you talked about like your mother's influence as well as some of your formative life experiences. Like what aspects of your childhood and upbringing like led you to prioritize nutritional wellness and see it as like fundamental to like the human experience?
Yeah, again, exactly what I said earlier of just my mom was so like prioritized that over absolutely everything. Like we shopped at thrift stores, like things were tight, but just the nutrition aspect never deprioritized to the point where when I was young and I didn't know much, I was actually embarrassed. Like my mom used to pack me lentils for lunch and I found it so embarrassing. I wanted to be like the cool kids that got to eat pizza and Lunchables, and here I was with my lame old lentils, and now I couldn't be just more thankful for that aspect, and also for how much reading was promoted for me as a child. So my mom would take me to the library when I was young, and that's what during the summers. Unfortunately, again, just because of my financial needs, maybe I didn't have the money to go to like summer camps and all that stuff. But what my mom did every summer, and I was so excited about, was take me to the library. And I used to go work with her in the summer. So while she was a nanny during the summers, I would go and I would actually hang out with her and the kids she was taking care of. And every weekend, she would take me to pick like literally like 10 or 15 books, and I would just go through them. And that's what I would do all day during the week while she was working. And so that combination of like reading everything I could about nutrition, psychology from a young age, plus the foundation about how important it is to eat well, really led me to where I am today.
Yeah, no, that's really, really amazing. And the reason why I wanted to ask that question and circle back to that is because I'm sure people are listening and saying, like, hey, I am a single parent or I am someone who
Mhm.
grew up, impoverished and I'm still struggling to understand how that can be done. But I think your mother's influence really shows that, hey, it can be done if you
Mhm.
use what you have. Like literally start what you have. It doesn't have to be something very ornate. It doesn't have to be a Whole Foods esque life
Yeah,
either because Whole Foods is so expensive. It could be something, as simple as like, going to a store where the fruits and vegetables are fresh and on sale. Like making sure you can provide in that way for your child or even for yourself. Cause I think some of us are just learning now, what is it like to have a balanced diet? And I'm sure like the Lunchables and stuff was cool, but now that I'm an adult, I'm like, oh my God, I
yeah,
can't believe I'm like, oh my God, why did they put that in my lunchbox? Why did I eat TV dinners? Like I'm going through like this existential questioning of like, oh my God, we were so inundated by the
right.
food commercials. Like everything had a jingle. Like the TV dinners had a jingle, Lunchables had a jingle, the pudding cups had a jingle, and it's crazy to me because I think like Michelle Obama came through, and I remember
Mhm.
being a kid during the Obama presidency, and the lunches changed because it was everybody had a pudding cup, a
Wow.
Rice Krispie. Michelle Obama made us have like pretzels and peanut butter and carrots, and people would say that they hated her for that because I was in public school at the time, so I saw the change in real time. But
Yeah,
I do think like you probably look back on your life and you're happy that you didn't have a
absolutely.
Lunchable
Yeah,
life or because these things have so much chemicals and
right.
preservatives. Ugh.
Mhm. Yeah, and to your point about it being, like if other people are listening out there that, maybe single parents and everything, it really is not that expensive actually if you're strategic about it. Like lentils, you can get a pound of them, dried lentils for 99 cents. Pre-soak them the night before and boil them in a pressure cooker, in the morning, and then you have meals for days. It's so healthy, so cheap, so affordable, and that also exists in the food deserts because they're dry. So there
Mm,
are definitely ways I think to go about it. It's just that to your point, it's not advertised, right? Like the Lentil Association doesn't have a multi-million dollar advertising budget, but Lunchables does. So it's just about
mm.
taking the time and having that time to think through what are healthy options I can provide for my kids that are super cheap. So yeah.
Yeah, crazy. And what I also would say in some of these neighborhoods is you don't pass the lentil shop, like you pass literally on one block there'll be a Dunkin'
Yeah,
Donuts, Burger King,
exactly.
McDonald's, the Chinese food
Yeah.
store, and then the Mexican place. Like, oh my God, one block is like a super amount of temptation. So I think that as we look to like Sweet
Yeah.
Green came up in the last maybe like 15 years. Like as we look to like fast casual and different types of dining, hopefully that will change. But I know of neighborhoods here in New York, every single restaurant on the block is we could say a cholesterol raiser.
Yeah.
It's something that is a serious amount of salt,
Yeah.
sugar, etc. And it's crazy because that's what we're inundated with even in our own environment. So it takes a lot of like getting out of the box and really
It
thinking,
does.
how can I get creative? How can I look beyond what I see outside of me? But yeah, thank you for sharing that. So your upbringing in Peru also seems to have given and provided you, and Peru and the U.S. seems to
Mhm,
have provided you with a foundation of strong women from your mother to your aunt, right? As
mhm.
you have taken the leap to start your own company and make that difference in the world, like, do you consider them like how have they inspired you on your journey?
They inspire me every day. I think every time I think of, to be completely honest, I have little breakdowns probably like once a week at this point. Where we're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? But
Yeah.
I reflect on what my mom has done, and what my aunt that helped raise me has done, and she is like one of the main motivators of what I'm doing. She has type 2 diabetes and now currently Alzheimer's, which is called type 3 diabetes because of its preventable nature often.
Mm,
And I think back on how literally when I was young, my mom used to drop me off at her house and I would help when I was in Peru. I would help her in her she had a salchipapa stand is what it's called in Peru. So it's deep fried fries and hot dogs, not very healthy, but she with the money that she made from that, she raised my two cousins, and they were able to go to college, able to become successful professionals. My mom similarly, I actually remember when we were still in Peru, she would, as a side hustle, make sandwiches and sell them in offices. And those you look at my mom, you look at my aunt, they don't have a LinkedIn, you don't really see their full story, but to me, they were entrepreneurs and they made it work from day one, having zero resources. So every time I think the hustle gets hard, every time I'm frustrated, I think how they were able to make it with so little. I have so much. Like I have a LinkedIn and a network of incredible people willing to help me. I have my education to fall back on. I have a supportive husband. I have savings thanks to the 2 years that I worked my butt off. So
Mm.
there are a lot of blessings. And when I think if my family was able to do it with nothing, of course I can do it with what I do have. And it just makes me feel very, very blessed. So
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, like the weekly breakdowns is relatable.
yeah.
I think everybody goes through that period as a founder
Yes.
where you're like, what the heck am I doing?
Just
And
trying to
this
normalize
week was
things.
that week for me. I was like, what am I doing? I'm in over my head. Oh my God. Like this man is gonna be president. Oh my God. Like I was in over my head again.
Yeah.
But I think like you're right, like the immigrant background really creates a different sense of grit and
Mhm.
understanding. And what I will say is yeah, you have family members that they weren't entrepreneurs because they came from, the Wharton school or no. They were entrepreneurs because it was survival and
Right,
they got out
exactly.
there, didn't understand we could say the minimum of the knowledge that we often have when it
Right,
comes to finance, but they
right.
learned as they went. And I think it's something about having that example that can make you step powerfully into
Mhm,
entrepreneurship, even if you feel unqualified. Because I
mhm.
think there's still this myth that like you have to be super educated to be an entrepreneur or even come from a certain
Yeah.
background. And what my path has taught me, because I come from the education and I still
Mhm.
had to learn a lot on the
Right,
job. Like there
exactly.
were plenty of things in my education did not prepare me for at all that I
Mhm.
face day in day out. So what I will tell anybody is like, yes, step up and be an entrepreneur, but I think like you said, when you come from that immigrant background, it's almost instilled in you to make it work, like make things
Right.
work, and whatever you do it well. Would you say that's how you kind of see it, especially in your entrepreneurial journey?
100%, 100%. And actually, that's what my dissertation was about. It was
Mm.
how overcoming adversity makes you stronger. And that's what I looked at thousands of people's stories similar to mine, and even like exponentially more inspiring of crazy things that people have gone through in their background, and how when they start to identify as somebody that has overcome adversity, how that literally makes them stronger psychologically as well.
Yeah, because entrepreneurship is a game of
Yeah,
resilience. It is the long
exactly.
game, and you have to definitely be resilient. So I'm glad that you had those examples. So yeah, let's talk about your career a bit, and I want to talk about the ups and downs, the winding road that got you to Nourish. So my first question for you in the career section is like, career wise, you made the transition from biology major to psychology major, nutrition minor. So you were always kind of blending the mind and the body, to eventually pursuing a PhD in organizational psychology. Walk us through these transitions, right? Like what did you learn about yourself and your academic goals at each stage, and why do you think the PhD was a perfect like culminating experience for you?
Yeah, so I went to Penn, deeply passionate about holistic medicine. I was set on becoming an integrative doctor, 100% set. Um, then when I got to Penn, a couple of factors changed my path. One, I took a biology class. It was not only really hard, but a little bit on the boring side. I remember sitting in lab, and I remember that I was falling asleep during lab, and partially it was because I wasn't getting enough sleep. But secondly, I thought, maybe spending the next 10 years in these sort of environments won't be the best. And then just going back to what I mean when I said hard, it was
Mm,
really difficult as me for me to go into Penn on a full scholarship because I truly feared getting bad grades. I
mm,
was not aware of the curve system. So I was not aware that, if you get a C or a D in a class, that could easily turn into a B plus, um, even an A sometimes for organic chemistry. Nobody really had explained that to me. So I thought, oh my gosh, like this biology class seems really hard. If I fail it, if I get a D, I'm literally going to get kicked out of Penn, and there goes all my dreams. So there was that. fear aspect. And then secondly, I then ended up taking a psychology class, Angela Duckworth's positive psychology, and I absolutely fell in love. I still remember the day in lecture when she actually talked about Sonia Lyubomirsky. I might be pronouncing her name wrong. Findings on how positive psychology interventions can actually slow down telomere growth. And what geek speak, what that actually means is that positive psychology interventions can literally slow down the rate of aging. And to me, that was
Mm.
fascinating. That through the mind, you can slow aging. And that day, I remember I actually went up to Angela after class, and then I saw her in office hours and asked to start working with her and that was my first ever research assistant role. And I still remain close to Angela this day. She came to my graduation. I'm just so my PhD graduation. I'm so grateful that she introduced me to this amazing field of positive psychology. And then in terms of my PhD, I became really interested in work life balance
Mm.
throughout as well, because most people spend, especially in the US, spend most of their day at work. The hours are long, statistically speaking, for the US more than many countries. So I really thought that by focusing on psychology in the workplace, I could make the most positive impact.
Yeah, I think it's amazing that there were like connecting the dots moments for you. And one thing that I know about Penn is that Penn is a funny place in that we often come in thinking that we're going to be one person and we leave a
Right.
completely different person.
Right.
And I think that that has happened to me. That has happened to many of us. But I will say like the resources at the institution are unparalleled and they really give you the opportunity to, even
Mhm.
if you feel like, oh, I'm going to study this, to pivot, to try new things, to develop a different sense of understanding. So it's wonderful that you stumbled upon Angela Duckworth's class and really felt that, you know, connection to psychology. Because man, like I know people who went through Penn for 4 years and it was like, hey, I did this, I got a job, da da da. But you had a moment of connection with an actual subject. And one thing I will say, like, as somebody who was trying to minor in psych but never happened, psychology at Penn is actually very rooted. It's rooted in a lot of biology, actually, especially
Yeah.
neuroscience.
Mhm.
So you weren't completely like away from it. You were just saying, "Hey, this is the aspect that I want to
Right.
focus on." And I think that's amazing that you were able to find like your specialization in the midst of like this wanting to help people, I guess, overarching with their health. And then the organizational psychology PhD. I mean, congrats on that. That's a huge achievement. Um, that's a huge achievement because I think I opened so many doors in the business world. But also it gives you an understanding of people, like you said, like work life balance. These are the things that a lot of us struggle with. And I'm sure as an entrepreneur now, you're going
Right.
back to some of the things that you studied. Talk to me about that because I think entrepreneurship throws that work life balance out of
Oh,
whack. So
yeah.
how has your studies like been illuminated or like what have you discovered about some of the things you worked on with research as an entrepreneur now, how that applies?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing is I will say between my bridge to academia, when I knew I wanted to go in all Nourish, to save money and to get experience in the quote unquote real world running a business. I was a strategy consultant for 2 years at
Uh,
McKinsey. And that really took me in for a deep dive of like, what the heck? How do I put in barriers of work life balance? Like working 80-hour days, being absolutely exhausting. I felt sometimes a little bit of, I learned a lot, but I definitely felt a little bit hypocritical. Like, okay, here I am, you Google me, I have a publication on work life balance, and here I am doing the exact opposite of what I should be doing. Um, but so then when I transitioned to entrepreneurship, I actually wrote on my journal that I'm never going to do that to myself again. And I've been
mm,
trying as hard as I can to keep to the commitment of just taking care of my well-being on a basic level. That doesn't mean, I'm not going to sacrifice for Nourish, but to whatever extent that I can, I definitely try to keep certain things as must-dos. One being exercise and physical activity daily. The
mm,
second being a holistic nutrition. So really, really taking care to eat healthy. Taking those extra 5 minutes to make myself a salad, having my daily Nourish chia pudding in the morning, all that good stuff, and I'm so excited for that to finally come out, so I don't have to meal prep it on my own. Those things, and even having my morning routine of just journaling. To me, faith is a really important part of my journey, so I pray, I journal, and everything. And those three things, like one, my morning routine; two, physical activity; and three, nutrition. I'm just not giving up, and that I don't care if that means the difference if Nourish succeeding in 3 years versus 5 years. I think it's worth it, and I'm just throwing out random numbers, but I think that's really really important. But it's hard, and to your point, I do have those breakdowns sometimes, and it's just going back and normalizing what I'm experiencing as well.
Yeah, I had to say that because I think that, especially those of us that grew up high achieving, getting into Penn, getting into these schools, we have a desire to push ourselves that
Yes.
even when we do become entrepreneurs, we're still fighting that, like,
Yes.
perfectionism or I should be here when, because man, like, I became an entrepreneur and I worked myself like I was at McKinsey. I
Right.
shouldn't have done that to myself. And,
Right.
I might not have been there, but I felt the pressure of,
Yeah.
this is my alma mater. This is what I'm doing. I got to prove myself. And I had to let go of that toxic mentality that I had
Yeah.
towards work. So I'm also learning in this season, like we all are, like work life balance as an entrepreneur. It needs to exist because you are the business at the beginning. Like
Right.
you are the business. And if you ride yourself to the ground, this will not survive. And
Exactly.
unfortunately, I have a mother who is a nurse, so she can say like, "Hey, Surayya, you're being toxic. Like, why are you
Yeah.
working so much? Pull back." But once again, it's this mindset that a lot of us have who grew up, a certain way of like, "Oh, I'm an entrepreneur, so time to push the gas even further."
Right.
When in reality, no, you're an entrepreneur to give yourself, like you
Yeah.
said, the exercise, the prayer time, the
Right.
time to eat healthy. You're an entrepreneur to actually take care of yourself, not continue to have an employee mindset and run yourself to the ground. So that's something that I struggled with intensely when I first started. Yeah.
And it's hard. And I think what's interesting about entrepreneurship is that it could go two ways, and it just really reveals the type of character you have. So to your point, if you are naturally a hard worker and are really hard on yourself, etc., those tendencies will be reflected when you're
Mm,
setting your own schedule. But similarly, if maybe you lack a little, if you're a little bit more on the chiller side, because I've had people say, "Oh, well, isn't it difficult for you to be able to make your own schedule because like how do you get things done?" And to me, it's actually the opposite of really having to have the self control to set boundaries. I have, for example, whenever my husband is home, I really make it the point that we're going to have dinner together, even if it's for 30 minutes, it's fine.
mm.
There will always be those times. It's just setting those little boundaries and having self compassion on yourself, because ultimately, to your point, you will burn out. Statistically speaking, you're going to burn out. You're not going to have as effective of a mind when you go in, and you are your own company at the beginning. So you really need to take care of yourself and just trust that what you do is enough.
Yeah. Oh my God. Like I'm trying to not get a PhD, but I have so many research interests on like employee mindset versus entrepreneur mindset and even like taking vacations. Like,
Yeah.
you're so used to checking in with somebody else that sometimes your body needs it, but it's like the work, the work, the work, the work. So it's definitely a shift that needs to be made. I want to talk a little bit about your PhD and like that
Sure.
process as well. So like a PhD in organizational behavior, while counterintuitive, I think is actually a great training ground for an entrepreneurial career because I think it gives you an understanding of the people factor within organizations. So when studying for your PhD, did the entrepreneurial bug come then, or did you envision yourself going directly into academia or industry?
Yes, that's a great question. So, to be honest, I did not choose entrepreneur. Not to sound cheesy, but I didn't choose
Okay.
entrepreneurial life. It chose me, and what I mean by
Mm,
that is I'm just so passionate about healing people and holistic well-being that it just came to a point that I could just not say no anymore to the fact that there are no convenient, extremely clean, high protein options on the go. That was just a problem that I had for me all the time when I was in my PhD. And then, honestly, while I was at consulting as well, and then seeing my aunt get sick, as I mentioned before, going from diabetes to developing Alzheimer's because she just didn't have the education or the knowledge or the time to make these healthier choices, which is kind of the last straw. And I thought, I can't just continue my life doing research. And I actually love research. I am a total nerd. I get a total high whenever I run experiments and then you see the p values being less than 0.05. It's like the best feeling ever. Um but at the end of the day, I really reflected in the fact that my colleagues were doing such amazing research at Wharton. And I honestly, not to be cynical, but I thought, I don't really think I'm going to be missed. If I leave, there's going to be still plenty of amazing research being done. But if I pivot to this passion of mine, I can really make a unique impact that nobody else has been able to do yet. And that's where my passion came. And it's something I've been thinking about for years, and it's always in the back of my head. But at some point, I just couldn't ignore this little bug. And what's interesting is I didn't grow up with my dad. In fact, I went through a very long period of time where I didn't really have a connection with him. I didn't really reconnect with him until I was 15. Um, and he's an entrepreneur. And it's really interesting in terms of epigenetics because, again, he did not raise me at all. And now that I have a little bit of more of a relationship with him, it's been really interesting to see just to get back to the fascinating psychology aspect of
Mm.
how maybe I'm thinking maybe there's something entrepreneurial, with the fact that my mom really helped raise me in these really unique ways. Plus, my dad actually does have a business. And even though he had no impact, I would say, in the early years of my life and how I was raised, it still kind of came together that way as well.
Yeah, no, that's very, very interesting. The epigenetics part is so interesting because
Mhm.
my dad has this like theory that he's like, you're one third your mother, you're third your father, and then one third yourself. And I think
Interesting.
even if we try to deny
Right.
our parents are in us. I kept on
Exactly.
thinking growing up, my parents were in STEM. My mom was a nurse and
Right.
biology. My dad was an engineer, but I think like I have a rigorous mindset like them. Like I attack my business like an
Right.
engineer. So I sometimes I'm like, wow, like we don't think we're our parents, but we actually low key are our
Right.
parents. And it
Right.
takes time to like understand, oh, like you actually do have your parents in you. So I'm
Right.
glad that you as an adult are like opening yourself up to those different sides of you. And I'm not sure what your faith practice is, but when you talked about like not being missed at Wharton, it makes me think of a concept I've been talking about, and I talk about this with a lot of the guests: what we're good at versus what we're called to.
Mm.
And I've been thinking about that because, when you become an entrepreneur, you can do literally anything. You can
Right.
start any type of business. But I began looking at in my own faith journey and asking God, like, what
Mm.
am I called to, like, versus what I'm
Exactly.
good at? And I
Yeah.
think, like, I've had to ask God for that direction,
Yeah.
for Him to show me what am I called to, because I could spend my whole life doing what I'm good at. I think
Right.
many of us who grow up in school, we're good at teaching, we're good at research, we're good at these academic things, but that might not necessarily be what we're called to. So it's always this like almost spiritual journey when you begin
Yeah.
to break away from what is expected of you to understand, hey, like there's a mission that I feel like I have, or there's something bigger as to why I do what I do. And I think in those moments, it just shows you how much of life is a surprise, because we
Right.
can't really plan who's going to do what or who's going to become what. But what I will say is when we tap into like what we're called to do versus
Mm.
what we're good at, I think that's when we really begin to feel like we're making an impact in the world.
I absolutely could not agree more with that. And I think often, like, as you're like praying about your calling and stuff, it's really interesting because I would say what's been revealed to me is that the things that I'm like quote unquote good at have been still helpful in a way. So to your
Mhm.
point about like the people aspect, I'm it's such an important part of my value system to treat people well that I it's going to be core to when I start hiring on more people at Nourish. I could never see myself being that person that has a negative or toxic culture, and that's just so important to me. And then in terms of, the research passion that I have, I could not tell you how many hours researching each ingredient, reading the randomized controlled trials of the ingredients that I wanted to put in Nourish so that I can make sure that there is science behind the benefits of everything that I have. So I do think that, whether you think it's God, whether you think it's fate, we think it's God, depending on what people's religious affiliation are, everything just really beautifully comes together. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Everything comes together. And one thing I will say is you talked about it with your father. Like one thing that I notice is if you are to be an entrepreneur and the area that you're supposed to be an entrepreneur in, if you look back on your life, you'll say like, man, this made a lot of sense.
right.
And sometimes it takes that time out of college. It takes that
Hmm.
time out of academia. It takes that time
Right.
to really wake up to, who you are as a person. And sometimes I look back on my life and I'm like, man, what did I think of going to business school as an undergrad? Lord, like, was I crazy?
Yeah.
Because and and not to beat myself up, but I didn't know what I know at 17 when I put that application in that I know now. And
Right.
granted, it was always something businessy hovering in the back, but I didn't know it would be entrepreneurship. I had no idea. So I think like when you're open to the elements, you'll realize, oh,
Mhm.
there were bits and pieces of
Right.
this puzzle that I had to put together to understand. Because I always had a passion as well for social justice. And people would always
Mhm.
say, well, you're going to corporate America with this activist spirit. I'd
Right.
be like, can y'all stop bullying me? But then I realized I was like, oh, well, there's a field called social entrepreneurship where
Mhm.
people could merge their, activist ideals with business. And I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds like me. So I think like there always are the bits of pieces of like, okay, I like this research thing, but it might not necessarily be applied in this way. It might be applied in this way. And I love the fact that you said that because people think all the time when they change careers, oh, well, my past life was a waste. No, it was
Oh,
not a waste. And it gave you skills and a
mhm.
mindset that you need to do what you do. I truly believe nothing is a waste.
Amen to
Everything has a purpose. And I love connecting the dots all
Mhm.
the time.
Cannot agree more.
Yeah. So I feel like the last question I have for you in this career section, I'm sure someone's listening to this and saying like, I'm pursuing a PhD or doctorate and I'm wondering if I'm on the right track. Even post grad might be unclear for them. They might be in industry and just feeling a type of way. Honestly, like I think I saw an article on Business Insider where a woman talked about having a PhD in English and going into industry and completely just hating it and regretting having her
Yeah.
doctorate. So there's a lot of like regret going on. There's a lot of stuff going on. And they might be asking themselves, like, do I choose industry work, academia, entrepreneurship? Like, what advice would you give to someone that's navigating that gray area right now?
Sure. Yeah, I had a lot of these conversations as I was making my decision to leave academia, and I think, two things that I would suggest people to really, really reflect on, and one being really think about what you enjoy daily and
Mm,
what brings you joy. And I think for me, for example, that is creativity and being around people. So those were two things that are really, really important to me, that I really, really over everything makes me happy. And then two, I think realizing that no career is perfect and then really reflecting what are the pros. This sounds very simple, build a pros and cons list, but I really think just getting to the nitty gritty. What are the pros of an academic career? And for example, the amazing flexibility that you get to research what you're passionate about. That is such a pro. But then think about, what are the cons? Depending on what field you're in, research is really slow. It's very competitive to get into certain journals. There are a lot of really amazing things and there are a lot of not so great things. Switch to industry. What are the pros of industry and what are the cons of that? Uh, some of the cons is you don't have as much of that creativity on average in some industry jobs because you are reporting in general to a boss, etc. So obviously it depends. Uh, so really thinking through that, and then realize and really making sure to think through the cons as well, because there are cons to everything and there are pros to everything. And same thing with entrepreneurship. And then another thing that I would also suggest to people is when they're thinking of industry, industry is a very vague term. So there are
mm,
thousands of jobs. You can go into a job, for example, at a think tank and take advantage of your PhD, or you can go into a data analytics role that's like very general and isn't particular to the type of data you might have realized, or you can go into the subject matter expert of whatever is your PhD in. So there's just so many ways to go about it. As well. And I will say that something that I found that's really interesting is that there are a lot of parallels between entrepreneurship and academia, because you kind of also decide your own time on average in academia. So
Mhm.
for the most part, obviously you have colleagues that you go on these projects with, but you come up with your research ideas, you test them. um you make a hypothesis, you test it, you reiterate, etc. And that is exactly the same as entrepreneurship. I come up with the ideas of the products I want to develop, I'm testing it out on the market, I iterate, etc. So, and I make my own schedule, and that is actually pretty similar. So there are some interesting parallels there.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that they're similar because I always said that they're similar and people
Yeah.
look at me like I'm crazy, but it's the same process. The research process, the
Mhm.
hypothesis driven
Right,
entrepreneur, right, has an advantage because they understand I must account for pivoting. I must
right.
account for
Exactly,
my hypothesis being wrong most of the time,
exactly.
more so than right. And I
Yep.
always joke and say that my undergrad thesis prepared me to do what I do today
Mhm.
because I understood the
Right,
value of inner customer interviews,
right.
testing, figuring things out. Like I think that those are we look at these processes and we're like, oh, like they're so separate, but no, they're actually very much intertwined.
In
And
agreement.
I think one of the things I told somebody the other day, and I was like, one of the best ways to understand where you fit in terms of this business environment. So we have some people that work in corporate, we have some entrepreneurs, we have some um people that are academics and teach in business schools is like really ask yourself what type of impact do you want to be. Like, do you want to be the person researching the entrepreneur or do you want to be the entrepreneur that somebody researches? Because I told
Exactly.
them, I was like, I really believe the founders that I meet and myself, we will be case studies at these
Mhm.
places, right? Because of the way we're doing things, because we're testing it on the ground in real time. And then somebody will, eventually a researcher will come to you and say, hey, can I write a case study on Nourish? Can I write a case study on your journey? And then for those who are in corporate, it's like, oh, you don't want to build the company or write the case study, but you want to be the person that helps. Once
Mhm.
it's there, you're the administrator. And I came up with this new theory on careers. I'm always coming up with this new, I'm always coming up with a new theory, but I came up with a new theory on careers where I was like, okay, some people are builders, some people are administrators, some people are analyzers. And I'm trying to figure out like where we fit in. But I would say like the entrepreneur is the builder, the administrator is like a corporate employee, and then the analyzer is really most of the time the person either in academia or, like you said,
Right.
in an industry position as a data analyst or a subject matter expert, etc. So we really have to think about like what are your strengths and how can you leverage those strengths
Yeah.
in an area that feels most fulfilling for you. And I actually like when people say, hey, I did a PhD, but I don't know, because it makes me realize, okay, in that gray area, when you get out of it, you're going to have clarity. And
Mhm.
that's why you got to go through it, because
Yeah.
you don't want to wake up in academia and feel like, oh, I wasted my life
Right,
if it
right.
wasn't your path.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I think it's really important to just be having those conversations throughout the process as well. So um I could not agree more. And then also another thing, it's like with industry, I think it's also okay because a lot of people, like glamorize academia, they glamorize entrepreneurship, and just having a good old normal
Oof.
job is also
Mm.
great as well. If it gives you work life balance, giving you financial stability, etc. There are many perks to that as well. And being able to be an entrepreneur is also, it's a very difficult, it's taxing financially at the beginning. Not everybody is in a place where they can do it. If you have and what you said earlier of like my mom, for example, doing that out of survival is, that's very
Mhm.
different than having the mind space to be able to think through what exactly you want to do. So yeah, I really
Yeah.
think that there's a path for everybody, and that all career options are very viable options depending on where you are in life and what you want to do.
Yeah, it's totally it's a mixture of things. And once again, you talked about glamorization. I hate how certain careers are glamorized.
Right,
I just hate the glamorization of entrepreneurship, especially. I hate the glamorization of, we could say, white collar corporate careers. And I
right,
also hate the glamorization of academia, because depending on what circle you're in, you can feel like, oh, this is the logical next step.
right.
And that can block you. I've seen all three paths glamorized in I could say gross ways, because all three paths have their, like you said, pros and their cons. I always say, like, as an entrepreneur, I'll hear some entrepreneurs, like I went to the summit in Colorado, like trashing people that work 9 to 5. Oh, I'm not a 9 to 5. I'm like, man, I'm trying to build the best 9 to 5 job in the
Right,
world for
right,
people. I'm trying to make sure that I give them the best 9 to 5 job ever, because
right,
that's what
exactly.
I wanted, which is why I had to build my own. Like, a
Right,
lot of us understand, like the more seasoned ones understand, our job is to not look down on someone who wants stability, but to
exactly.
provide them with a new type of stability. I look
Mhm,
at corporate America and the lack of diversity, and I'm like, man,
mhm,
this is crazy. Like, I care about creating spaces where people can thrive if they're different, and
mhm.
all of these things. And I think, like you said, like understanding where you are. But I also think we need to stop with the glamorization,
Right.
period. Like, every career has its struggles. Stop with the glamorization.
Mhm.
One of my favorite artist said it takes like 10 years to build a career in anything. And I agree. It takes at least 10 years. You're going to have to do your, like, Malcolm Gladwell,
Mhm.
10,000 hours.
Right,
And please do not choose something because it's hot or because it's cool, because
right,
you're going the wrong way. If that, you're gonna have to do your 10,000 hours. So please stop doing things because people say it. But in different spaces, it can, whether it's investment banking being glamorized, or whether it's academia, or even certain high growth venture capital entrepreneurship, there's always a status quo. I'm
mhm,
realizing in every industry. And it's important to be grounded in who you are, so that hey, on my timing, or if you're spiritual, on God's timing, right? Like,
right,
surrender
exactly.
that process, because it's going to be a process. That's all I got to
Mhm.
say to people. Academia, entrepreneurship, corporate, it's going to be a
It was
process.
process, yeah, yeah, and
Mhm.
I think as soon as you realize that, it's like there's no easy way, really. No matter what you choose, academia, getting tenure is a pain in the butt, entrepreneurship, getting your business off the ground, such a pain, 9 to 5 job is if you wanna step up through the corporate career ladder, that is extremely difficult as well, so nothing is perfect in this life, and as soon as you're able to acknowledge that, then I think life becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, I laugh because sometimes I'm like, dang, like, oh my God, I should have, like, I didn't get a job after graduation. Like, podcast people know my whole story. But then I laugh because I'm like, man, like, I just feel like God's plan was higher, because he knows I would have hated, like, the corporate
Right.
politics, and like, he knows I just hate that stuff. And I would have really felt like an outcast or a misfit at some of the companies I wanted to work for. So I think, like, yes, it's hard because I had to move back home. I had to, like, do everything from scratch. But
Right.
my heart is not the heart of, like, having to go through 1,000 happy hours I don't
Right.
want to, or schmooze the boss to get,
Right.
to 2 years to still have a job. And, like, so everyone's path is hard, and that's one
Right.
thing I'm realizing, like, and I think it's humbling, because, like, in the moments where I feel like it's tough, I'm like, "Oh, well, it's a different type of hard, but it's not the type of hard that would have, like, had me annoyed out my mind and,
Right.
like, ready to quit." So I get that, I get that. So I wanna talk a little bit about, we're at our last couple questions, and we have a culture segment where we
Mhm.
like to talk about, like, the culture, the big impact. So you launched Nourish during a pivotal moment of your career. Like, you invested, like, 2 years of R&D, research and development, alongside your work as a management consultant at McKinsey. The listeners wanna know, like, for those of us who know McKinsey, oh my God, how did you balance it all? And, like, what was the thing that kept you motivated during that transition period?
Yeah, I didn't balance it, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah, it was tough, really hard because I think McKinsey, when you're in an intense project, we really have time for absolutely nothing during the week, and on the weekends you're just exhausted. And I just wanted to be a couch potato. So some weeks were slower in terms of So what I was doing then is I was just really taste testing everything, trying to find like I was doing pop ups, like um trying to figure out what recipe that if I wanted to bring this to market, what it would be, etc. And all that stuff. It took me 2 years. One, because it's really difficult to find high quality suppliers, find manufacturers, all that stuff. But then two, because it just takes a lot out of me for McKinsey. So I really chopped at it piece by piece. And what really kept me going was again that hope that of building a legacy, to be honest. And I don't know if you know Stephen Covey, but the 7 habits of highly effective people. But one
Mhm.
of the things that he suggests is to work backwards, and not to be and a little depressing or anything, but I always think through, like, when I die, what do I want to be remembered for? And that's like for
Mm.
truly making a positive impact on people's health and for making the world just a tiny bit better, and for making wellness more equitable to others. And to me, my calling is really via nutrition, I think. And so that's what really kept me going when I was exhausted and didn't really want to move a finger on the weekend after a grueling week at work. And then secondly, also because it's just like a blessing that I'm able to have a job that pays. To be blunt, I mean, I'm frugal. I'm an immigrant, so it's not difficult for me to financially frugal. So I saved every penny that I had because I knew that, this money that I'm making, I'll be able to reinvest into Nourish, and then that way I can at least start bootstrapped. And that's how I was able to do it. So
That's like the smart way. That is a smart way to do it. And honestly, like I know some people get caught with the golden handcuffs and move up and up and up and up and up in the company. But what I will tell anybody is like keep you talked about the end in mind, like keep your end goal in mind, whatever that is, and trust that like make the company work for you. Like make the
mhm.
corporate career work for
Yeah.
you. Do not become a slave to that career. Do not become a slave to that job. And I think even in consulting, like maybe people are more tempted to because the layoffs aren't as intense as like tech and some other industries.
Mm,
So there's this like there's this almost like comfort and stability that you can get from consulting. It's an up and out culture still, yeah, but at the same time, you can pivot to another stable job, etc. So I hear a lot of people who want to do entrepreneurs never really doing it because they got into that field. And I think like you always have to think like make it work for you, make it work for you, and like make the whole situation work for you. So it sounds like you did that. And I think that is great. I battled with myself because that's what I wanted for my postgrad. I wanted to work for 2 years and
right.
then start my business, but that was not God's plan for my life. And I had
Exactly.
to resign my own desires. So
Yeah.
I started from the ground,
Mm,
like zero to my name. I had went through even financial instability when I started.
right.
And because I had just graduated from college, fresh off of college. And yeah, I did a fellowship, I did a couple things, but like I was like, man, I have like nothing. And then,
Right.
divine intervention, I got a grant, then another one, then another one. So
Yeah.
doors just started opening. So however we get there, make these systems
Exactly.
work for you, whether bootstrapping your business,
Right.
getting grants, whatever, make these systems work for you. The help is out there, the money's out there, the resources out there. And
Right.
I'm glad that you were able to find your way. So my last question for all my guests is always a forward thinking question. Cause I always say like, this is a podcast where we think about like our past, our present, and our future. I feel like entrepreneurs today are more than their businesses, so much more. Like the business becomes a platform for so many more things. What I like to call the platform career. There's speaking, there's all different types of things that happen from one very impactful business. So like, where do you see your journey with Nourish taking you in the next like 5 to 10 years? Book deals, speaking, other businesses. I'd love to hear the thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So in
Mm.
terms of Nourish itself, I really see as become my dream is and passion and hope is for it to become the Patagonia of food. And I
Oh,
really
wow.
deeply care about the environment, and I want it to my hashtag is save the world with Chia. So not only
Mm.
for it to nourish people's short and long term health, but also nourish the planet's health. We already plant one tree per product sold, but that's only the beginning. And I really want to use the platform that I build via Nourish to be able to one make well-being more equitable towards others, but then two also make it in a way that everything you eat is actually having a positive benefit in some way to the planet that we live in. And then secondly, in terms of other things, very personally, it's always been in my dream to write a book. And so my specifically on conscious living. And what I mean by that is I really don't think people have the space or time to think through the impact of every single decision. So whether that's on a micro level, for example, what you do in the morning and how that's going to impact the rest of your day and what science is behind that, to what exactly you put in your mouth, and now from the molecular level, how everything you put, what impact that's going to have on your longevity, to then stepping back on the macro level, like how does supporting X business impact people in another country, etc., like how it's impacting globalization, how supporting like one business versus another is making an economic equality or inequality, and just getting that together in one book to me would is my dream, and something that I would hope to have the bandwidth to do after I launch Nourish off the ground. And again, in terms of everything coming together for a reason, thankfully I do have my academic background and familiar with that writing style at least. So it would just be pivoting to a more user friendly, I guess, writing style versus an academic one. So
Yeah, oh my god. That academic writing is just that's not it takes one out of you, but yeah, writing for an audience, definitely. Okay, thank you so much, Ariana. I think this was a great episode. I think so many people are gonna get a lot from your
thank you.
story. People are probably like, where do I know Ariana from? I didn't go into that. So she was actually my thesis advisor in college, and it's amazing how we can have these full circle moments. I could have never predicted we would both be entrepreneurs at the same time. I probably laugh and say, me being an entrepreneur and Ariana, no, like I would have never thought that, because I thought, like I said, I thought I would be in corporate at this time,
Yeah.
preparing for maybe another thing. And I probably thought I'd see you in academia, but it just shows you, like, once again, like one thing that I'm thinking about a lot is like God's plans are so much higher than ours.
Yep.
And if we
Amen
trust
to
him,
that.
or whatever you believe in, if you trust in that, right, it will
Right.
lead you to where you're really supposed to go. So y'all, if you get one thing from the episode, if you get one thing from this episode, let it be that we
Yep.
did not know we'd be in this position today at the
Exactly.
same time. But it just shows you, like, life has a funny way. Life has a
Mhm.
really funny way of doing things. All right, y'all, this is Surayya from the Purse Professional, and I'm out. Bye.
Bye.